right, everybody, good afternoon. Happy Friday. A couple things for you at the top, or actually one big thing at the top. This week we saw more evidence that our economy is strong and inflation is falling under President Biden. Inflation has now fallen back to pre-pandemic levels, and the economy grew 3.1% last year, stronger than during the Trump administration. At the same time, wages and household wealth are higher than before the pandemic. In 2023, we also saw prices fall for key household purchases like gas and milk, eggs, toys, appliances, and airfares. While experts predicted a recession, we heard that over and over again last year, President Biden helped grow the economy from the middle out and bottom up. And Americans are feeling the results. 2.7 million jobs were created last year, and consumer sentiment surged 29% in the last 2 months, the biggest jump in more than 30 years. We know our work is not done. President Biden will never stop fighting to lower costs and give hardworking American families more breathing room. This stands in stark contrast with House Republicans, who don't have a plan to lower costs and whose MAGAnomics fails the middle class with tax giveaways for wealthy and big corporations, cuts to Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and higher costs from prescription drugs to utility bills. Now, tomorrow, as you all know, have been tracking, tomorrow's International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a time we mourn one of the darkest chapters in human history, when 6 million Jews were systematically targeted and murdered. We also mourn the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution. As the President said in a statement this morning, this year our charge to remember the Holocaust is as pressing as ever. In the wake of the evil attacks by Hamas terrorists on the people of Israel, which amounted to the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Additionally, since October 7th, we have witnessed an alarming rise of despicable anti-Semitism at home and abroad, which must continue to be met with our unequivocal condemnation. We must continue to call out Holocaust denialism and efforts to minimize the horrors that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th, including the horrific use of rape and sexual violence to terrorize victims. President Biden will continue to stand up to anti-Semitism and hate-fueled violence at home and abroad, including through the first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism he announced last year. This is our charge to ensure we cannot continue to say never again. All right, now as you can see, we have two guests in a room with us today. Since day one, President Biden has led the most ambitious climate agenda in history, unlocking clean energy breakthroughs, advancing environmental justice, and rallying the world's leaders to transition away from fossil fuel. And whether it's historic hurricanes, floods, or wildfires, the science is clear. Climate change is the existential threat of our time. So today, the Biden-Harris administration announced a temporary pause on pending decisions on exports of liquefied natural gas to certain countries until the Department of Education can update the underlying assessments. And to talk a bit more about this is today with us is the President's National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi. Ali, thank you for coming back. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Today, as Karine noted, the Biden-Harris administration is announcing a pause on pending applications to export liquefied natural gas to non-free trade agreement countries from here in the United States. The department's pause will remain in effect until the agency updates key economic and environmental analyses. These are the analyses that underpin the way the Department of Energy makes decisions about these authorization applications. Specifically, the Department of Energy has said that it will focus on better understanding energy costs and the implications of future exports on energy costs for American consumers and manufacturers, on energy security for the United States here and around the world. Third, on greenhouse gas emissions, and in particular methane emissions, which we now know are more potent than previously understood. and also on the burden that export potentially places for the frontline communities where this gas is chilled, liquefied, and then exported. We need to do that accounting with the benefit of also a sharper and more current read on the market, both on the demand for global LNG as well as the projections around long-term supply. Let me be clear. The U.S. is already the #1 exporter of LNG, and we have been and remain unwavering in our commitment to support our allies and partners around the world. But we have to absorb, at this moment, we have to absorb very clearly all that is in front of us. From day one, President Biden has listened to the science, he's looked out for frontline communities, and he's followed the facts. That's absolutely critical. And that's really been the story of the president's leadership on climate from day one. Whether it was signing us back into the Paris Climate Agreement, reversing countless rollbacks that threatened public health and our energy security, passing the biggest climate investment in the history, not just of the U.S., but of the world, and rallying everybody around the whole world to raise our climate ambition. In Glasgow, just a few years ago, that meant bringing people together around the global methane pledge, which now over 100 countries have joined. And just weeks ago, at the United Nations Climate Conference, that meant bringing the world together on the need to transition away from fossil fuels. So today, from President Joe Biden and DOE Secretary Granholm, we hear more steps in the right direction as we work to tackle the climate crisis and to protect future generations.
Thank you, Karine, and thank you, Ellie, for being here. So why is this pause coming now and not on day one? It's almost 3 years into the president's term, and since he took office, the administration has approved thousands of oil and gas projects. So why didn't you take this pause on day one to do all the critical analysis you just talked about?
So, great question. The Department of Energy, this analysis that the agency is undertaking, it's not unprecedented, it's routine. And the analytical basis for these decisions, the economic analysis, the environmental analysis, is at this point, in most cases, about 5 years old. We've also seen the market change dramatically over this period of time. If you look just at the United States, which has now become the #1 exporter, we've seen massive build out here of LNG, as well as approvals that would double, just if you look at what's under construction, double the export capacity, just if the projects that are under construction when they come to fruition. So that dynamic has changed. The second thing that we've seen change is our evolving understanding of the environmental implications of this. Look, over the last 10 years, for example, we've started to really understand the potency and threat that methane presents to the environment. Methane is this super polluting greenhouse gas, 80 times more potent than CO2. And in some instances, some scientists believe that it represents about half a degree of the warming we're seeing here. And so one of the things that we need to do is take in and integrate some of that additional learning around life cycle greenhouse gas analysis. It's really important that the department does this routine work, and I think this will inform how we approach this program going forward.
Thanks, Ali. I know the administration has said this review is expected to take several months. Can you be a little more specific about the length of time this might take?
The department is going to move with speed. They're going to really take this head on. It's a commitment from the secretary. What we know is that there's important information to collect. I just spoke a little bit about the market dynamics. We need to understand, for example, also the impact of potential costs on our consumers here in the United States, on manufacturers here in the United States. A large group of manufacturers that have thousands of facilities across the country making things like steel and aluminum actually sent in a letter to the department saying they have a lot of input they'd like to provide. So the department will be doing that work. It will be engaged in a public comment process. This has to be a transparent process, an engaging one, and they will continue to move that forward.
And as you mentioned, there's been several reviews in the past. Those generally haven't involved pauses. So why this time is there a pause on these pending sales? Some of your critics are saying it's because of politics trying to please environmental activists ahead of the election. What do you say to that?
I think we've got to be clear-eyed about the challenges that we face. The climate crisis is that, an existential crisis, and we've got to be, I think, really forward-leaning into making sure that we're taking that head on. But here's, I think, the critical context for your question, and that is that if you look at the approvals already that have been completed. You've got the number of projects that are under construction set to double the existing capacity, and then approvals beyond that would double it yet again. So there's a long runway here, and we're taking a step back and thinking, okay, let's take a hard look before that runway continues to build out.
Can you share the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that this rule would cut in the short term? Can you detail that in any specific way for people to understand?
I think that's part of what this review is all about, is to understand what are the implications of LNG. We've started to learn more about leakage rates at different parts of the supply chain, upstream, midstream, downstream. We've started to learn a lot about what happens to LNG as it's chilled and then shipped overseas. We're also seeing major shifts in the demand for this product. What is it backing out on the other end? You think about a lot of our allies and partners who use that LNG today actually are on a trajectory to back out that demand, to replace it with things like clean energy and energy efficiency. So this will take all of those factors in and hopefully produce an answer that helps us answer this really important question.
And is there a specific benchmark that the administration is trying to reach when it comes to renewable scaling that gets to where you could restrict natural gas exports even further?
I think the president's been very clear about his targets and ambition for the United States on climate as a whole. That's getting to an economy that does not put greenhouse gas pollution into the sky by the middle of the century, net zero by no later than 2050, and getting halfway there by the end of this decade. The way we do that is by deploying clean energy. We've already doubled the pace of deployment of technologies like solar and wind here in the United States. Under the president's leadership, we're really seeing a renaissance in the use of technologies like advanced nuclear, folks announcing commitments to invest in that, and plants that were slated to retire staying on to continue to produce clean power. We deployed over 1 million electric vehicles last year in the United States. So I think it's a sector by sector strategy pinned down in this North Star goal of getting to net zero.